Baldur's Gate 3 has an intimidating mid-game. Merely existing in the environment damages you. Everything is overpriced, and above all else, you have to face death itself. You can choose to up the difficulty even further by playing Honor Mode. Only 2% of players have completed Honor Mode for several reasons. Bosses have additional legendary attacks that add to the complexity of the already most challenging encounters. You can't reload saves, which means you must live with each of your decisions, and most importantly, you have a single life. If your party dies, you have to restart from the very beginning, no matter how many hours you put into the run. Why would anyone play Honor Mode? To get the golden dice. A purely cosmetic skin for your dice, the single thing that carries over from a previous playthrough and can be used for all future runs. With all of this in mind, I will be setting off into the Shadowlands to show how I choose to route Act 2 and tackle each of the encounters on the quest for the golden dice. I will be attempting this run as a giant barbarian subclass. Let's go red 40 on the skin tone. Credit to Morgana Evelyn for her frost giant build, which I will link in the description if you're interested. Upon entering the Shadowlands, we could immediately feel the cursed environment draining the strength from our bodies. Gale, Karlach, and I found protection through the use of torches, but Shadowheart appeared to be unaffected by the Shadowcurse. Shadowheart suggested it must be tied to her devotion to Shar. We asked, what about us? Where's our protection?
Don't give me that look.
But Shadowheart responded with tough love and simply said we would find a way to survive. She went on to ask us to keep an eye out for any place dedicated to Shar worship. Thus, we agreed to keep our eyes peeled as we set off in search of a more permanent solution to protect us from the Shadowcurse. In the distance, we spotted a dome of light that seemed like a good place to start. But before we could make it there, we crossed paths with another group of adventurers known as Harpers. Just as we were getting acquainted with one another, one of the Harpers, Jonas, was snatched by a shadow. Before we could find Jonas, Jonas found us. Refusing to be the first to die in this horror movie, we drew our weapons on sight. Shadowheart took point, summoning spirit guardians to radiate the shadows and further illuminate the battlefield. Gale and Karlach stuck close to a brazier on high ground to maintain protection from the Shadowcurse, while I moved into Shadowheart's spirit guardians and started throwing pikes into the darkness. With some backup from the Harpers, we made light work of the shadows, and they proceeded to invite us to follow them to the light in the distance. On our way, we spotted a night orchid, Shadowheart's favorite flower, and picked it for her. She panicked, saying they were deadly poisonous, but immediately folded and said it was all a prank. Shadowheart was thankful and agreed to continue carrying us with her spirit guardians for our kindness. With our torches and flowers in hand, we proceeded to the light in the distance where we found a place to catch our breath from the Shadowcurse. Before we could get too comfortable, we were ambushed by the Camp Cougar, who immediately ensnared me with vines and identified us as infected. Where'd you get that worm? I started ripping through the vines, but the cougar was not intimidated. Right as she began to order her allies to strike us down, our old friend Mull came running in to our rescue. Mull bought us enough time to explain to the cougar that we carried an artifact that protected us from the influence of the Absolute, and that we were only looking for a cure for our tadpoles at Moonrise Towers. The cougar took kindly to our reasoning, securing us some new allies on our fight against the Absolute as she invited us inside for some wine. Before we headed inside, Karlach pulled everyone aside to exclaim that the Camp Cougar Jaheira was part of the legendary group that saved Baldur's Gate from a ball spawn named Sarevok over a century ago. Once Karlach calmed down, we paid a visit to the local quartermistress to purchase what we could afford for the time being, and then found another familiar face, Dammon. We handed over a piece of infernal iron that Dammon used to craft Karlach an insulating chamber, allowing her to touch again. With some more innovative smithing from Dammon, we had our long-awaited intimate moment.
She's just got this leather mask covering everything. Let's kiss this piece of leather, I guess.
Before things could get too heated, Dammon interjected to dampen our mood by saying Karlach had to return to the Hells or her infernal engine would soon incinerate her from the inside out. Karlach and I agreed to celebrate her new upgrade as soon as possible and vowed to find a solution to her engine before turning towards the inn, where we found many more familiar faces. We gathered from Alfira that the French from the Grove had been ambushed by the Absolute cultists on their journey to Baldur's Gate, but Roland, the wizard we convinced to stay in the Grove, was able to buy some of them time to flee to Last Light Inn. However, Roland wasn't able to save everyone. His own siblings were captured and taken prisoner in Moonrise, along with Alfira's girlfriend Lacrissa. Similarly, we encountered Barcus once again, who had an interest in freeing his brother, who was being held prisoner in Moonrise Towers. Thankfully, we found Counselor Floric already on the scene. We approached to ask her to lend us her military aid for a prison break mission, but she hit us with the Uno reverse card, asking us to free Ravengard, while she fled towards Baldur's Gate to send reinforcements from Lord Gortash's Steel Watch. The mention of Gortash's name ignited a fire within Karlach, as this was the very man who had sold her to the devil. On top of that, Floric explained that Gortash had earned the title of Lord due to his invention of the Steel Watch. As Karlach and I agreed to take down Gortash, Floric slipped out the back door and fled the battlefield once again with her entourage of military might, leaving us alone with a man stuck in a coma named Cullagh. Art kept muttering the name Thaniel, and Shadowheart ascertained that the man had been in the Shadowfell, causing him to lose his memories, and suggested if we found some personal effects, we may be able to wake him. We observed that Art had calloused fingertips, suggesting he played a stringed instrument. We decided we'd keep a lookout for any such instrument and turned to have a drink with the cougar.
I chug the wine.
After a drink, the cougar shared that General Ketheric Thorm, leader of the Absolutes and former Sharan, had long ago built an army of Dark Justiciars below the End. Although the cougar was able to defeat Thorm, he had now returned and is now apparently invincible. So before launching an all-out assault on Moonrise Towers, we were going to have to find a way to strip Thorm of his invincibility. The cougar then invited me upstairs, but after all the other seduction attempts from this journey, I saw right through the cougar's invitation and we fled. Our main issue, however, was that we lacked protection from the Shadowcurse. But on our way out of Last Light Inn, a group of Harpers informed us they planned to ambush a convoy of absolute cultists who had found a way to move freely through the Shadowcurse. Thus, we followed the Harpers to seek our solution to the curse. Eventually, we made it to the ambush spot, where we spotted the absolute convoy being led by Cursed Spider-Man, who appeared to be carrying a protective lantern. Feeling spooked, we tried to stay hidden, but a level 1 goblin passed its perception check and tried to flush us out. Spider-Man didn't take kindly to this, taking care of one goblin and giving us our cue to jump out of the dark to attack. The Shadowheart immediately summoned her spirit guardians and ran into the fray, blinding our enemies but taking heavy damage in the process. Karlach ran into back rubs, searing and battering one of the orcs with her torch before Spider-Man started clawing her. Spider-Man then hid behind a sanctuary, giving Gale the opportunity to hasten me so I could send my pike flying into one of the orcs, knocking him out of Spider-Man's retaliation range so I could safely send another to take him out. Preparing for the worst, Gale held his torch steady to protect us from the Shadowcurse as we repositioned a high ground. The cultists began launching their counterattack as one of the goblins shot a Harper before deciding to radiate itself, triggering Spider-Man to try and retaliate against Shadowheart, but Gale was ready to counterspell him. Our Harper friend then burnt another goblin alive, causing Spider-Man to retaliate again, heavily damaging Shadowheart and Karlach. Karlach tried her best to torch bash the enemy orc as he came for Shadowheart, but it wasn't quite enough and Shadowheart went down. But Shadowheart still had the energy to command her spirit weapon to lacerate Spider-Man, causing him to bleed. Karlach immediately threw a healing potion on Shadowheart to get her back up to cast a sanctuary of her own, buying herself some time as Karlach maimed Spider-Man in place with her torch. Offended, Spider-Man multi-attacked Karlach, knocking her out of the fight but giving us the time to throw in more pikes and magic missiles from above, nearly eliminating Spider-Man. Our Harpers backed us up with a massive 1 damage, but they were effectively holding the line, soaking up brutal damage from the enemy orc, who Shadowheart then eliminated with her spirit weapon, which was immune to Spider-Man's psychic retaliation. Shadowheart then healed everyone, picking up Karlach before she gambled on a 50-50 command, losing and breaking her sanctuary in the process. Luckily, Spider-Man targeted another meat shield Harper, and as he attempted to scuttle away with another sanctuary, Gale counterspelled him, leaving him wide open to more pikes. Spider-Man fell, leaving behind his lantern that seemed to protect us from the Shadowcurse. From inside the lantern, a pixie called out to us to be released. We freed the pixie, who in turn gifted us a bell to summon her anytime we needed protection from the curse. With our solution to the curse in hand, we returned to Last Light to rest and recoup before pressing forward towards Moonrise Towers. As we turned into camp, a projection of Mizora appeared to send her pet on a new fetch quest. Mizora shared that among all the other prisoners, the absolute cultists had also captured a powerful devil who Will was now tasked with freeing. Sensing desperation in her voice, we took this as our opportunity to negotiate Will out of his pact. Mizora agreed to let Will off his leash, but only once the mission was complete, per the terms of their pact. With more reasons than ever to launch a prison break, we agreed to focus our efforts on freeing the Moonrise captives come morning. Once Mizora's projection exited our camp, I checked in to seek wisdom for our prison break from Old Man Halsin, since he had some first-hand experience with being captured by cultists. But as we were catching him up to speed, the old man cut us off, taking particular interest in the other old man who was stuck in a coma, Cullagh. Halsin shared that the name we heard him muttering earlier, Thaniel, was in fact the very spirit of the land, and suggested this could be our lead to curing the Shadowcurse from the surrounding lands for good. As Halsin ran off into the night to attend art, I noticed Astarion scratching at his back, thinking he must have cut a rash from the shirt he stole from the lady back in the mountains. But upon closer examination, Astarion's rash appeared to have developed into infernal writing that was a fragment of a larger text. Astarion appeared nervous and asked to keep his condition between the two of us. We agreed and decided we would get to the bottom of his skin condition. But before anything else, with Karlach's new upgrade installed, we headed to sleep to get our time together.
It is strong here.
Not another fever dream.
Getting stronger.
Get out of here.
Instead, at the worst time, our dream visitor struck us with another fever dream to raise our blood pressure even further by divulging that the Absolute had given the order for our transformation many times already and was seeking to retrieve our artifact.
Don't you dare drop my protection.
Stressed from the fever dreams, Karlach and I decided we would just get our time another night and went to sleep. Before setting off towards Moonrise Towers, we decided to poke around Last Light to see whether we could find any helpful loot. Shadowheart guided us into the jail, where we spotted a cracked wall that we were able to break through. On the other side, we found a valuable ring that would help light our way. We then proceeded towards Moonrise Towers, but spotted some creatures lurking in the dark.
Come on out, you rapist!
After eliminating our assailants, we found a chest containing a new set of gloves for Shadowheart. With Moonrise just around the corner, we were stopped by the average tax collector who wanted to violate our pockets. Karlach and I decided it was time to file our taxes jointly, so I kicked the collector out the window while Karlach went down to secure our tax return.
She's really making a lot of noise down there. Probably broke her back. I kicked her in the back and she fell down like 10 stories.
After raiding the town treasury, we regrouped and made our way to the front door of Moonrise Towers. Before we could enter Moonrise Towers, we were stopped by infected cultists guarding the door. Using our tadpoles, we successfully feigned being true souls and were told that Ketheric's advisor was off in the field and to report to Zarel in the audience chamber in the meantime. But rather than barreling straight into the audience chamber, we began talking around to gather any information we could. First, we came across a bugbear who had a common acquaintance with Karlach, named Flo the Garrotter, a Cambion from Hell. After the bugbear finished trauma dumping on us,
Made old freaks grow flesh upon flesh.
He was growing flesh? I'm not even sure what that means, but that's absolutely vile.
he coughed up 3 soul coins, courtesy of Flo, to empower Karlach. But beyond the soul coins, the bugbear carried many valuable wares that we could not afford yet, but wanted to get our hands on. While we plotted a way to come up with the funds, we encountered a familiar face, Roa Moonglow, the leprechaun Astarion had robbed back in the goblin camp. Roa decided to look past our former goblin and Zinterim slaughters and trade with us. But just like before, Roa's goods were far outside of our price range. So we returned to camp to invite Astarion to pay his old friend a visit. While we were out adventuring, Astarion had been honing his thief skills even further back in camp. With his new skills, Astarion was ready for another tag team heist with his Fog Shroud conjuring partner in crime, Gale.
Give me these. Really need that shield. Really need that hat. Really need that. Really need that. Might as well take those while I'm in here. I'll take that. Give me that too.
Astarion was caught rifling through pockets more than once, but he would simply escort himself to prison and return until Roa and the bugbear were robbed blind. Once Astarion got his hands on everything we needed from Roa and the bugbear, we returned to meet a peculiar merchant who dealt in blood named Iraj Obladra. Iraj propositioned our vampire friend Astarion to bite her neck, and in exchange she would give us a powerful potion.
Are you actually asking me to do this? Trading me for some potion?
It's just a bite.
We convinced Astarion we could really use the potion, and he begrudgingly agreed to bite the heathen. Iraj was true to her word and gave Karlach a potent potion that would increase her strength permanently. But our potion came at a cost. Astarion was now distraught that he may have contracted a bloodborne STD. We assured Astarion it was all in his head, and that a bit more thievery could be the remedy to help our kleptomaniac vampire feel better again. Thus, while Gale and Astarion continued robbing everyone in Moonrise Towers, Shadowheart and I went on a shopping trip using the newly gathered funds back in Last Light Inn. After Shadowheart and I finished supporting the local businesses, we returned to our espionage mission in Moonrise Towers. Our next source of cultist intelligence was Mig, an ogre, who disturbingly said she heard meat sounds coming from the walls.
Is it you?
No!
I got Gale the Meat Hunter with me.
With Gale on the hunt for meat, we continued forward to meet another infected cultist named Lincella, who appeared to, like us, have figured out tadpoles were highly effective in controlling gnolls. Lincella shared that she had personally stood before the Absolute and was granted powers, which she made use of to game end one of the gnolls. She told us if we pleased Zarel, we too could meet the Absolute. But as we were headed towards the audience chamber to meet Zarel, we stepped in a strange mucus dripping from the walls above. So we climbed a ladder to search for the source of the mucus and made our way around the rafters until we found some vines leading to the living quarters above, which triggered our loot goblin instincts. Our instincts betrayed us, however, and we were jumped by a mimic that was carrying a letter written by a Selûnite mother addressed to her daughter. Unsatisfied with the haul, we continued our search for loot, which found us in Ketheric's master bedroom. bedroom. So we started prying up Ketheric's floorboards and rifling through his belongings, stealing his cape for Will and pocketing his diary and personal letter addressed to him from his wife Melodia. After robbing Ketheric's room, I continued to scale the tower until I encountered some ghouls.
They want my toes.
While I was conversing with the foot ghouls, I've never eaten a ghoul before, Gale was caught loitering around in Ketheric's room by a guard.
Nat 20. I live here. This is my house.
We continued exploring our new residence until we found ourselves in a vile room riddled with flesh and carrion. Gale suggests that it would be fitting to set down the head we stole from Ethel's home on a pedestal, which opened a secret room containing a cool hat for me and a scuffed ritual circle that Gale vandalized, receiving a powerful boon from his ex-girlfriend in the process. With the living quarters thoroughly looted, we descended back to the rafters to search for the source of the dripping mucus.
Nobody really seems to mind all that much, that we're all just crouching on the rafters above them.
We kept to the shadows and eventually found the source of the meat sounds and the dripping mucus. Gale the meat hunter agreed to reach into the mucus hole for us to see whether there was more loot, but all he found was the same alien presence we sensed from the Nautiloid as our dream visitor exclaimed it was a trap.
Just go limp, Gale, go limp, go limp.
Gale went limp and rode it out, slipping out of the mucus hole by the skin of his teeth.
Let me try it next time. Look fun.
We tried to get Gale's thoughts on what just happened, to which he simply replied,
If anything, I feel more at peace than I have in months.
Gale wanted to do it again. So Gale went in for round 2, but the meat entity got the better of him this time, giving him an out-of-body experience. Once Gale was encircled by the meat entity, he introduced himself, which caused the meat entity to compress itself into an understandable form, identifying itself as the Absolute itself. The meat entity claimed it was a slave of the Chosen's grand design, but said we were the flaw in their design, the single thread that could unravel everything they had planned since we carried the artifact which protected us from enslavement. Just as Gale was about to settle down with the meat entity, Shadowheart snapped him out of it by yelling to Gale to pull out from the mucus hole. Even Gale knew this wasn't right, and he started clawing at whatever he could reach.
0. What was that, Gale?
Although Gale was able to pull out, escaping the meat entity with his life, he suffered a dislocated shoulder from his actions. Gale toughed it out, and we descended back to the ground floor to enter the audience chamber where we met Ketheric Thorm himself, who was in the middle of passing judgment on Minthara for failing to collect our artifacts. With some wisdom from Shadowheart, some guidance from Gale, and a little inspiration, we were able to influence Z'rell to show Minthara mercy. Ketheric ordered that Minthara be taken to the prison below, and next turned his attention to the goblin underlings, ultimately ordering their immediate execution. But the level 1 goblins weren't going down that easy, landing an insane one-tap on Ketheric. Shockingly, Ketheric got back up and started aura farming the level 1 goblins during his iframes. Once Ketheric finished aura farming, he retired upstairs. Once we finished aura farming, we followed him upstairs, where we more formally met Z'rell's acquaintance. Z'rell began to intrude into our minds, where she started to get a little freaky, searching for proof of our faith. I metaphorically put her in the corner of the room by distracting her with thoughts of Karlach, but Z'rell kept trying to get freaky, so we asked her to show us the powers the Absolute bestowed upon her. Like Lincella, Z'rell's amazing power was to insta-kill her own allies. But this power was more than enough to make us play things safe by asking what we need to do as we try to learn more of Ketheric's invincibility. Z'rell informed us of a relic that General Thorm required, and he had already sent out his most trusted advisor, Balthazaar, to retrieve it from below the Thorm family mausoleum. Z'rell tasked us with aiding Balthazaar in bringing the relic back, directing us to first go into Balthazar's room to grab a moon lantern to protect us from the Shadowcurse. But with that already taken care of, we kept it to ourselves that we had already looted Balthazar's disgusting room and stolen a lantern from Spider-Man yesterday, so we hurried downstairs to launch a prison break before Z'rell could read our minds. We entered the prison to see Minthara being psyoped by agents of the meat entity. After barbarically persuading them into letting us take charge of the situation, we reached out to Minthara's mind. As we approached, we heard the voice of the meat entity again, and we realized Minthara was being exposed to the presence that claims to be the Absolute. I was able to push past the presence, allowing Minthara and I to plan to have her feign obedience to sneak past the meat agents. But the meat agents were onto us, forcing me to barbarically persuade them into looking the other way. Minthara wanted to jump the agents, but we needed to stay undercover for the time being, so we proceeded with our newly enslaved drow companion, just to be checked by another meat agent right as we exited the room. We continued to talk our way past the agents and delved deeper into the prison, where we spotted a cell full of the French from the Grove and another cell full of gnomes, including Barkis's brother Wolbrin. The only problem was that the prison was being patrolled by more meat agents and scrying eyes. But we saw there was a conveniently placed bottomless pit surrounding the central central watchtower of the prison. So we tactically launched every meat agent in sight to their death in the pit, hiding the evidence in the process, except for one last stationary meat agent orc who was too heavy to lift. So our party genius Gale devised a plan to lure the meat agent closer to the pit using the power of the puh. As the agent cold approached the puh, I ran up behind him, kicking him into the pit below. We made our way into the central watchtower to search for a way to open the cells, but found their switches blocked by the meat warden. We tried talking the warden into releasing the prisoners, but after the warden unnecessarily disrespected us,
You are small, Trousseau.
Okay.
Insignificant.
Okay.
And above all, replaceable.
I'll show you replaceable.
with the warden taken care of, the prison was now completely unmonitored, allowing us to speak freely. The French directed us towards the gnomes, where Barkis's brother Wolbrin was in the midst of plotting a prison break himself. Wolbrin asked for a tool to break out through the weakened back wall.
And move the dried beef sausage over to Wolbrin. Take the sausage, Wolbrin.
So we tossed him his hammer we found confiscated in the warden's office. Using his hammer, Wolbrin one-tapped the wall and made his way over to free the French. Meanwhile, we opened the gnome's cell door using the lever in the warden's office, allowing us to make our way through Wolbrin's escape route to a conveniently docked boat that was perfect to make our getaway from Moonrise with all of our prison escapees.
Let me drive the boat.
While the Harper screened everyone for tadpole infection, we connected via tadpole with Minthara to bring her up to speed with the rest of our journey since Will had knocked her out back at the Goblin Camp. With Minthara now protected from the influence of the Absolute, we invited her to join us on our journey as one of the good guys, and she made her way back to our camp. Further inside the inn, we spotted Raphael playing Minecraft with Mole. Gale int-checked Raphael, telling Mole of the winning move to defeat the devil.
Raphael engaging in child trafficking.
And as Mole was leaving the table, Raphael tried justifying why he was playing with a child. Sensing our disgust, Raphael gave up advocating for his actions as he tried diverting our attention back to our own tadpole issue, buying him enough time to flee the crime scene before Karlach could jump him. With the Predator out on the loose, we found Alfir reuniting with Lucrissa, and after thanking us, she gifted us with some new garments. We next overheard Barkis reuniting with Wolbrin, who didn't seem quite as enthused. Regardless, Barkis gave us a bomb as thanks, as he anxiously shared that Wolbrin was scheming to utilize a weapon of mass destruction back in Baldur's Gate, so he said we'd keep an eye on Bongelheimer if we made it back to Baldur's Gate ourselves. With everyone in Last Light in good spirits and everyone safe for the time being, we turned our sights towards finding Balthazaar at the Thorm family mausoleum. We ventured back into the cursed town seeking information, turning our sights towards the local bar. We approached the bartender to see what rumors and information we could gather about the area, and gathered that this bulbous creature was Thisibald Thorm, alcoholic quadruped son of Ketheric Thorm. After chugging with Thisibald, sharing stories, and chugging even more to butter him up to the point he began to overshare, we began asking him questions about who cursed this land. He said Father Ketheric sustains the curse, and mumbled about the spirit of the land that Old Man Halsin had referred to earlier. Trying not to tip off the bartender about our plans to cure this land, we threw him off the trail by making him self-conscious, asking how he became whatever he is now. This caused Thisibald to start breaking out in the meat sweats as he chugged once again. Closing in on a 1.0 blood alcohol content ratio, Thisibald started reaching philosophical enlightenment as he began oversharing Ketheric's personal mysterious secret. Ketheric had ordered Thisibald not to talk of this secret, or he would perish and be buried inside the Thorm's family tomb, but Thisibald was already far past the point of inhibition control, so he spilled that there was a cage, her cage, right before chugging one last time to calm his nerves, leading to his untimely demise. After looting the now untended bar, we continued around town until we found a hospital to treat Gale's dislocated shoulder. Shadowheart talked to the triage nurse, who told Gale to join the non-existent waiting line, but our master of deception and trickery used her training to feign illness, giving us a fast pass to see the doctor immediately. We made our way to the emergency room, only to see the doctor was none other than Ketheric's holistic medicine practicing physician uncle, Malus Thorm.
What the fuck is this loon talking about?
Gale held his shoulder in place for the time being, and once the operation was complete, the doctor turned his sights towards Gale's dislocated shoulder. Gale the hypochondriac was afraid of the nurse's recently used tools, and the doctor agreed, but didn't have a way to clean their tools. We took this opportunity to suggest that the blindfolded nurses maybe wipe them off on his shirt. With a bit of inspiration, the doctor offered his shirt, allowing the blindfolded nurses to deep clean their tools on the doctor, who was carrying a valuable necklace, but more importantly, a battered loot that matched Art's calluses. Gale keistered the loot while we kept looking for someone to treat his shoulder, only to find a nurse overlooking 2 deceased patients who we recognized to be Arabella's parents from the Grove. At this point, we decided this hospital may not be the right fit for Gale's treatment, so we promptly exited the back door only to cross paths with Arabella herself, standing outside the hospital's gate. Just as we were greeting each other, shadows began to encroach, but Arabella had apparently learned a thing or two since we parted ways back in the Grove. Arabella said she was looking for her parents, but we didn't have the heart to break the news to her at the time, so we invited her to stay in our camp and told her we would keep an eye out for her parents. After some grave robbing, we eventually stumbled on the Thorn family mausoleum being staked out by the Predator. Raphael began pitching his new play where the lead actor lurks in silence and shadows and was just like him, a predator.
Ooh, spooky.
We told Raphael we knew he was talking about himself, and he finally admitted his ex had taken up residence inside the mausoleum. Ex. While we agreed to help the Predator catch the other Predator, Gale wandered off to go fishing, reeling in a brand new weapon. Armed with our new weaponry, we entered the Thorn family mausoleum. Inside the mausoleum, we gathered more of Ketheric's diaries that divulged that Ketheric had experienced great loss, which shifted his faith from Selûne to Shar, the goddess of loss which Shadowheart also worshipped. Ketheric's diaries went on to reveal that this Balthazaar we were seeking promised to resurrect Ketheric's daughter, and in this pursuit, Ketheric had again shifted his faith from Shar to Myrkul, the god of death, forsaking all else. Behind a sequence of portraits that tracked Ketheric's stories from his splendor as a Selûne worshipper, to the tragedy of losing his family, to his return as the infamous general, we uncovered a secret passage. We descended further through the passage into
a temple devoted to the worship of rats.
Into a rat-infested temple where Shadowheart took notice of the numerous statues of her goddess Shar, recognizing the area as the proving grounds to becoming a Dark Justiciar. We sensed the importance of this rat temple to Shadowheart, so we decided to return to camp to get cleaned up for the occasion. While everyone was fixing themselves up, I approached Minthara, who now had time to ponder the fact that Will knocked her out and stole her shoes.
I have to bribe Minthara? She's in my camp. Take a roasted dwarf belly then. What do you want from me? You want a shovel and a fish head? Is that good enough?
To get back on Minthara's good side, Will returned her shoes among other gifts, and we returned to Dammon to outfit her with a new set of gear. Before heading back into the Rat Temple, we turned into camp for some rest and to drop the news on Arabella that her parents were gone. While Arabella processed the news, we got Minthara's thoughts on our situation.
Understanding what was done to me is beyond you.
Oh, she took a Spider-Man stance on me for that. Have you spent much time with Gale over there?
The wizard? No.
That's it. Just no.
After getting to know Minthara a bit better, we got some sleep. When morning came, we rallied Will to step in for Gale while his shoulder recovered, and Minthara to step in for Karlach to let her engine cool down as we returned to the Rat Temple, finding reanimated undead turf warring with reanimated Sharans. Once we closed the summoning rifts and cleared the remaining Sharans, a door opened to jump scare us with a literal meat shield that would have been real helpful in the turf wars. Nevertheless, we noticed a couple locked doors, so we made a detour back to camp to invite Astarion to crack the locks, where we found a valuable ring for Shadowheart. The sight of the grotesque undead unsettled us, reminding us why we decided to cure the land, so we returned to Lastlight to bring the loot we found back to Old Man Halsin. Upon our return, we played a tune for Art on the lute, which snapped him out of his coma to give us a lead on how to cure the lands of the Shadowcurse. Art told us whenever he saw the spirit of the land Thaniel, he always smelled lavender. Halsin took this lead and ran off towards the nearby lakeside where he opened a portal that he asked us to prepare to protect while he extracted Thaniel. As Halsin jumped through his portal, the shadows began to encroach. The Shadowheart immediately summoned her spirit guardians to illuminate our battle, while Will summoned a cloud of darkness to prevent our enemies from attacking Halsin's portal. With the portal now protected, Astarion started sniping while I threw my jabber. The shadows tried to overwhelm us, but Shadowheart sunbeamed them to oblivion and continued Beyblading her way through our foes until Halsin was able to retrieve Thaniel. After our extraction mission, we were feeling more confident with helping Shadowheart with her trials in the Rat Temple, and with meeting the grotesque necromancer Balthazaar. So we returned to Balthazaar, but decided to stay undercover as cultists for the time being to learn more of Ketheric's invincibility. Accordingly, we told Balthazaar we had already broken into his room and read about the night song in his notes, causing Balthazaar to start tweaking for reading his private journals.
They'll rip your tongue out, shove it down your throat.
After some barbaric persuasion, Balthazaar calmed right down and started talking business. Balthazaar informed us that the night Night Song lends the general his strength, his invulnerability, and that it must be recovered before his enemies attempt to exploit it. Balthazaar asked us to clear the path to the Night Song by any means necessary, as the way was barred by Shar's dead.
Shadowheart said perhaps it would be smart to play along for now.
We agreed with Shadowheart, so we agreed to play along.
Alright, I'll see what I can do then.
Which Shadowheart disapproved. While we were talking about Balthazaar, Astarion's kleptomania started taking over and he started grabbing anything that wasn't nailed down. As Shadowheart was sizing up Balthazaar, the light from her mace blinded him, instigating a fight.
I don't even know what happened, but we're fighting Balthazaar now.
Backed into a corner, I went into a rage, throwing one pike into Balthazaar before imbuing another with fire and throwing it into Balthazaar's meat shield, setting the creature on fire, weakening it. Astarion struck from the shadows, sniping the ghouls while Will casted Armor of Agathis and Cursed Flesh. This caused Balthazaar to resort to drugs, chugging a speed potion and trying to get Shadowheart sick, but his hands were too shaky from the drugs, causing him to miss and get radiated by Shadowheart, blinding him in the process. Shadowheart proceeded to summon Spirit Guardians to radiate flesh and blind our enemies further, before baiting him into taking an opportunity attack, which he whiffed, leading him to trip and fall prone, completely blinded. Shadowheart ran down Balthazaar and radiated him next, violently blinding him. Balthazaar's ghouls tried launching a counterattack on Will, paralyzing him, but with his adamantine armor, Will couldn't be crit, so he stood steadily as our stalwart statue of retaliatory cold damage. With all the attention on Will, I threw my jabber into Balthazaar twice more, ending the wide boy. With Balthazaar out of the picture, Astarion now had free reign to snipe the remaining ghouls as Shadowheart ran down flesh to continue radiating him. All the while, Will stayed posted in place, dealing out consistent retaliation damage. Focusing our efforts on flesh, I threw my poker into him and kicked him square in the tailbone. Will boomed on him, and Shadowheart firebolted him as he went into a rage.
Will, take it, Will. Oh, he proned him. Oh, laid Will out.
Just as flesh flattened Will, Astarion was able to send in a counter snipe, ending our squabble with Balthazaar and his brother. With Balthazaar out of the picture, Shadowheart embraced her emo phase, leading us deeper into the Rat Temple and collecting umbral gems from each of the trials, bringing her closer and closer to becoming a Dark Justiciar. Once Shadowheart got her hands on the gems from each trial, we turned into camp to allow Shadowheart some time to replenish her blood supplies, while Karlach and I finally got our evening together. But before Karlach and I could have our moment, Astarion pulled us aside, freaking out that he may have transmitted his disease from the STD merchant to Halsin while we were gone. Astarion asked us to break the news to Halsin, who was completely unfazed, saying he had already contracted every incurable STD from his past romantic partners. Instead, Halsin asked us to cure the land, talking about how Thaniel was rended in two while in the Shadowfell and how we need to find his missing half somewhere out in the dark. Sensing our impatience, Halsin marked our map for where we could find Thaniel's missing half before trying to get in on the action.
If you want me, I'm yours.
Ugh. You're good, homie. Just stay here.
So we pointed Halsin back to Astarion, finally allowing Karlach and I to have our evening together.
Pimp walking in the morning.
After our intimate evening in the Rat Temple together, Karlach joined us in Will's place to journey deeper into the Rat Temple. We made our way into an ancient library, where after assassinating the librarians, Astarion cracked a lock, granting us access to a spear that Shadowheart seemed to take particular interest to. With Shadowheart satisfied from completing everything she needed to become a Dark Justiciar, we continued around the Rat Temple in search of Raphael's ex. Eventually, Shadowheart spotted the Predator. Not only that, but Raphael left out the part that his ex would be accompanied by their 8 sons and dog. Regardless, everyone began setting up in position to ambush the ambush. Shadowheart positioned behind Raphael's ex.
He's a goblin.
Karlach positioned behind his sons, and I positioned on high ground while Astarion took a brief trip back to camp to get some blood from Halsin since he volunteered the night before.
Anything.
Now happy, Astarion came back in with a couple arrows, immediately chunking Yugir. Karlach started jumping the sons, cleaving 3 at a time, and as Yugir turned towards Karlach, I threw in my jabber to take him out. Shadowheart moved in to radiate more sons, teleporting over to back up Karlach. With the sons being locked down, I focused on jabbing the dog. Once Raphael's ex and dog were out of the equation, we bullied the remaining sons out of the last umbral gem for Shadowheart. Guided by her faith, Shadowheart asked us to descend into the darkest depths of the Rat Temple so that she could fulfill her life's calling by finally becoming a Dark Justiciar. We had our reservations, but Shadowheart claimed we were exactly where we needed to be and volunteered to test the elevator alone and open the door to the Rat Temple's inner sanctum. But before proceeding forward, we had to fulfill our promise to Halsin and search for Thaniel's other half. Following Halsin's mark, we came across a cursed child lurking around in the dark named Oliver, who resembled Thaniel. We tried to simply ask Oliver to return to Thaniel, but he fled. So we followed him through his portal, which led us to the town square where Oliver encapsulated himself in a protective sphere while sending shadows to kamikaze us. We immediately split up to to ensure we weren't all caught in the kamikaze blasts, and I prioritized throwing weapons from a distance to trigger the blast, giving Karlach and Astarion free range to attack the others. Feeling outmatched, Oliver upped the ante by summoning a Shadow Owlbear on us. The shadows began clawing relentlessly, downing Shadowheart, but her Light of Lathander was able to pick her back up. Astarion and I focused the Shadow Owlbear, narrowing things down to just the kamikazes. Karlach cleaved a couple down and took a shot at another while Shadowheart bopped another. Oliver continued to relentlessly summon more kamikazes, downing Shadowheart again. But we managed to clear the shadows, and Astarion threw a health potion at Shadowheart, picking her back up. Oliver desperately summoned more shadows, but Astarion was able to disengage and safely trigger the blast. This allowed Karlach to safely cleave and shoot down the remaining shadows. With that, Oliver was exhausted, but was still saying he was staying in the Shadowlands. Understandably, Oliver had grown to be his own person after being alone for so long, and wasn't sure if Thaniel would even want him back. But by telling him change is good, we gave the impressionable youth a nudge in the right direction, successfully guiding him back to Halsin to reunite with Thaniel. We returned to camp to ensure Oliver went to the right place, where we found Halsin and Thaniel. Halsin was appreciative that we were able to reunite Oliver and Thaniel, and agreed to journey with us as Astarion's blood bank moving forward. Thaniel was appreciative that we fought to restore him. However, the child told us that before the land could fully heal, Ketheric Thorm must die. Now is the time for everyone to get one more night of rest before our final push to take down Ketheric Thorm, so we made sure to get some proper nutrition, fueling up on alcohol. In the middle of the night, we heard a strange noise and rushed over to find our pets scared that this could be the end of our adventure. We assured them we've made it this far and not to be worried, and after some pets, we returned to bed. When morning came, everyone woke up with a terrible hangover, but this only put Shadowheart right in her element as she guided us back into town to pray to Sharan altars, and then back into the Rat Temple for another altar, empowering her as we sought out the source of Ketheric's invulnerability. Shadowheart led us back to the depths of the Rat Temple, where we found the rat's watering hole. Although she couldn't swim, Shadowheart had faith that her goddess wouldn't let her drown, and since Shadowheart had carried us this far with her spirit guardians, we owed her. So we agreed to accompany her as we descended into the rat's watering hole.
Poop water.
But the rest of us didn't worship Shar, and just when we thought we were about to drown, we awoke in what Shadowheart identified as Shar's domain, the Shadowfell. We followed Shadowheart deeper into Shar's domain, where we encountered a lunatic who started crab-swirling Shadowheart, making her fundamentally question the basis of her faith. Just as Shadowheart was getting her bearings, the lunatic continued to aggressively crab-swirl her by identifying herself as the Night Song, the child of the goddess Selûne, and that she knew Shadowheart was frightened by wolves in the dark. We stayed out of things as Shadowheart tried to center herself, spawning in the Spear of Night, only to have a sudden change of heart, throwing the spear into the abyss. Night Song sensed that Shadowheart was anxious that she justified her goddess, so she comforted Shadowheart, reassuring her that she would help us fight the battle to come, and that after that they would have much to discuss. After Shadowheart laid her hand on Night Song began pounding the ground, calling out to the gods, who responded by appropriately outfitting her for her battle as she flew off towards Moonrise Towers to kill Ketheric Thorm. With Night Song gone, Shadowheart went into a panic, wanting to leave before Shar could punish her for her disobedience. Thus, we rushed out of the Shadowfell, and Shadowheart shared that Shar had indeed punished her for failing, subjecting her to the suffering and agony of 1,000 people simultaneously. Although Shadowheart had just been reverse crab-swirled by her goddess, this only bolstered her resolve to take down Ketheric Thorm so she could speak with Night Song. After one last moment with Karlach in case we met our end in Moonrise Towers, we set off to kill Ketheric Thorm. We returned to Moonrise Towers, where we found the cougar had already arrived accompanied by her harpers, and that Night Song had already eliminated the first line of defenses. We planned our assault with the cougar, and after rallying Will in place of Astarion to help free his father and complete Mizora's mission, we proceeded into Moonrise Towers. We were met by Zarel, who was not happy with our betrayal. We tried giving her the option to surrender, but she refused, instigating a fight. Karlach immediately popped a soul coin, and we both went into a rage. Will baited a counterspell, allowing Shadowheart to summon her spirit guardians before teleporting into the middle of the fray, blinding our enemies. Karlach followed Shadowheart in, rush attacking and cleaving Meg the Ogre. With our enemies now focused on Karlach and Shadowheart, I threw my jabber at an acolyte in the rafters and another into Zarel to set up a slippery surface. The cultists began launching their counterattack as the bugbear jumped into Shadowheart's spirit guardians. The ogre slammed the ground, and the Null Squad shot Karlach. As the harper shot back at one of the cultists, the cougar showed her true form right before Zarel gave our entire force the suck, eating an opportunity attack from Shadowheart in the process. The cultists continued focusing Shadowheart, causing them to get blinded and fall prone from their inaccuracies. Shadowheart and Karlach kept up the pace, radiating, blinding, and cleaving our enemies as Will blasted both acolytes off the rafters before counterspelling a cultist trying to cast Hunger of Hadar on the bulk of our force. Arrows continued to fly as the gnolls kept shooting Karlach and our harpers kept shooting the cultists. With Will now unable to counterspell, the cultists launched their wombo combo by summoning a death cloud for Zarel to suck us inside. Feeling cocky from her suck game, Zarel tried to get away from Shadow Sentinels, succumbing to an opportunity attack. As their leader fell, the cultists knew they had to do something about Shadowheart and Karlach. Their paladins advanced to smite Shadowheart, but she was able to resurrect herself with the Light of Lathander. The paladins continued swinging on Karlach and Shadowheart, whiffing and falling prone, leaving them wide open for Karlach to cleave them, maiming them and eliminating two. I threw my jabber at the enemy Acolyte, clearing the death cloud from our team. Meanwhile, Shadowheart continued to bait our enemies in whiffing attacks and radiating themselves to death. Just as Will blasted one of our enemies, cultist reinforcements began to arrive, sending a guiding bolt into Karlach, downing her as the gnolls shot Shadowheart, downing her. The counterattack caused the cougar to jump in and growl at our enemies while her harpers tried running in to help, slipping on the ice in the process. While I continued to throw more jabbers, Will casted a death cloud of his own on the reinforcements before retreating to make sure he maintained concentration. To cover Will, I ran in and kicked an acolyte to death, and the cougar leapt into Will's death cloud to eat some smites and fall prone. With their fearless leader in a compromised position, the harpers said to arrest them, but we were way past that point now. So I kicked an adept into Will's death cloud, triggering his death ward before circling around to throw my pike into Lincella, eliminating her. As Will blasted a couple cultists to keep them inside his death cloud, the cougar ate another guiding bolt, turning her back into a cougar. As the cultists began to succumb to Will's death cloud, the cougar found her footing, only to valiantly ice storm herself, causing herself to slip again as our harpers advanced to eliminate the final gnoll. With the cultists clear, I helped Karlach and Shadowheart to their feet, as Will looted and then bought some potions from Tali. After taking a quick rest to recover, we proceeded to find a disheveled cougar who agreed to accompany us to take down Ketheric. Once we healed up the cougar, we ascended the tower with Karlach cleaving and slashing her way through one last necromancer. With the way clear, we ascended to confront Ketheric Thorm with Nightsong. We arrived to find Nightsong already had Ketheric in shambles, so we took advantage of his moment of weakness to tell him we broke into his bedroom earlier and found a note from his wife, bringing Ketheric to his knees. We tried recruiting Ketheric by telling him we knew a doctor that could revive his wife, but Nightsong came crashing in, disrupting our negotiations. Ketheric seemed to recognize Nightsong, referring to her as Aelin, but there must have been some bad blood as Aelin referred to Ketheric as dog. We tried talking Nightsong down, but Nightsong kept pushing it, causing Ketheric to go hostile and begin barking at us.
Bow, bow, bow!
Our artifact intervened to protect us from his barks, instigating an all-out brawl. I immediately went into a rage, throwing my icy jabber at Ketheric, but it missed and didn't return. Luckily, I still carried my old trusty pike in my back pocket that flew true, causing Ketheric to slip. Will took this opening to throw down a potion of flying on himself, Shadowheart, and Karlach, allowing Karlach to fly up to the dogs, only to whiff as she swung right over top of the prone old dog. Shadowheart was next to fly into Radiate Necromites before Misty stepping up to the dogs herself, slipping but managing to flashbang Ketheric and eliminate his best friend. Ketheric's Necromancer tried fireballing our cougar, but Nightsong was hot on her trail, smiting down two Necromites and calling down the moon itself to aid us. Ketheric got his footing to smite Karlach before commanding his cronies to target Shadowheart as he horde striked her. But even while prone, Shadowheart proceeded to dodge attacks effortlessly, further blinding the Necromites as even more Necromites began to hatch, dealing heavy necrotic damage around the field. Shadowheart found her footing to summon more Spirit Guardians while Karlach slashed at Ketheric, maiming him before flying off to support Will and Aelin. I took this opening to throw my icy pike into Ketheric again, causing him to slip before disintegrating another Necromite with a front kick. With Ketheric prone and maimed, he lacked the movement to stand up and was helplessly stuck in place. With Ketheric immobilized, I threw my pike into him, causing him to yelp uncle. But Nightsong wasn't satisfied. She flew up for the finishing blow on the dog. Just as she went to smite Ketheric, she was stun-locked by the mention of Ketheric's daughter Isabel. Ketheric capitalized on the stun and summoned the meat entity to bop Nightsong and teleport away. With Ketheric leaving his Necromancer for dead, we made light work of the solo caster and turned our sights towards the Tentacle Burrow in pursuit of Ketheric and Nightsong. The cougar agreed to stay topside to deal with any cultist stragglers, and with that, we descended into the Tentacle Burrow. Upon landing, our dream visitor identified the area as an illithid colony, the source of the tadpole infections. We continued through the colony until we stumbled upon Zariel's asset, Mizora herself, who was trapped inside a Mind Flayer pod. We noticed similar controls to those that opened Shadowheart's pod way back on the Nautiloid, but after all of our adventuring, I now had the strength to smash the pod, freeing Mizora.
I'll give your belly a good rub, but never could stand the smell.
Ugh. Since we held up our end of the bargain, Will demanded to have his pact severed. In response, Mizora referred to the fine print of their pact, taunting that she had 6 months to release Will. But Will didn't fold that easily, and was able to negotiate a treat for his troubles. After Mizora threw Will a bone that gave him the power to summon a Cambion to fight for us, she gave him permission to tell us how they met. With that, Mizora parted ways, and Will agreed to tell us of their tale if we made it out alive. We next turned our attention to the remaining pods, which contained many familiar faces. The only problem was that some pods contained fully transformed mind flayers, but we decided we would take our chances to save our former allies. I opened the pods, and with the help of our new friends, we blasted, smited, kicked, chopped, and jabbed our way through the squids and the brains. Once the fighting calmed down, we caught up with Zevlor, who informed us Ketheric had descended further into the Illithid colony. We asked Zevlor to rescue any other survivors, and pressed forward in search of Ketheric and Will's dad. On our way, we crossed paths with a familiar friend from the Nautiloid, our brain dog, Us. Apparently, Us had been captured for being specced out, so we turned our attention to the jailer to free our friend. After some barbaric persuasion, the jailer agreed to let us leave with Us. We next stumbled into the living quarters of the colony and tried asking for directions from the residents. Despite our diplomacy efforts, a fight ensued, which forced me to kick the necromancer into the nearby pit. We continued our descent, where we came across a room packed with ghouls and zombies. Will set up a defensive hunger of Hadara, while Shadowheart set up her spirit guardians for any that managed to make it through. As the gamers rushed into the cloud, I threw in icy pikes to create slippery surfaces inside the cloud, while Shadowheart rang her bells of death, blinding our enemies. Slowly but surely, we held the line until all the undead forces were clear, leaving just a single summoner that Shadowheart and Karlach ran down. Behind the graveyard, we interfaced with a brain-bending puzzle that granted us access to a brain in a jar. We took that brain jar and inserted it into a pedestal next to a disembodied head. We learned that the brain belonged to a frog that promised us power in exchange for purging their mind. With the promise of power, we purged the frog, who held up their side of the deal, granting us the power to resist Mind Flayer influence. While we were talking to the frog, Will pocketed a shiny rock from the table next to us. With the way forward now clear, we made our way to an elevator that appeared to descend into the depths of the colony. To play things safe, we split up and went down the elevator in groups, just in case someone slipped off the elevator on the descent. Once everyone assembled at the base of the elevator, we sensed the presence of the Absolute behind one last door. We entered to see Ketheric accompanied by two others, one of which Karlach recognized as Gortash, the very man who sold her to the Archdevil Zariel. The other appeared to be an actual psychotic albino woman named Orin, who was sitting on Will's dad. We eavesdropped to hear that Gortash was commanding Ketheric to secure our artifact and meet them back in Baldur's Gate. The three proceeded to use their rocks to command a giant brain to violate Will's dad. Will screamed out, but it was too late. Gortash and Orin had already departed with the Elder Brain towards the city of Baldur's Gate, leaving us to confront Ketheric. We approached to receive our long-awaited villain monologue, where Ketheric explained that his lord Myrkul had given him the power to resurrect his daughter Isabel. In exchange, Ketheric was to join Gortash and Orin to grow the cult of the Absolute and ultimately backstab them to control it. After he finished monologuing, we rolled a nat 20 to make him game end himself. But of course, it couldn't be that easy, and this led death itself to arise to take Ketheric's place.
Shit.
Karlach and I immediately went into a rage before grouping up for Will to throw a potion of flying on everyone. Shadowheart summoned her spirit guardians and flew off to handle the necromites while distracting Myrkul with a spirit weapon. As Will teleported over to prepare to free Nightsong, Karlach flew over to cleave and clear the enemy brain dogs. I tried to fly up to throw the Mind Flayer into the abyss. This is one of the more ridiculous things I've done, but it was able to teleport back up to me and stare me down menacingly for the disrespect. Myrkul locked in on the spirit weapon, buying us some time as more necromites were summoned, while the Mind Flayer unfortunately stunned me before flying off towards Karlach. Will took this opening to free Nightsong to aid us and curse Myrkul before flying down to threaten the Mind Flayer for Karlach. Will's Cambion sent rays of fire towards the soon-to-be summoned Necromite pods, helping Shadowheart keep things under control as she tried distracting Myrkul with another spirit weapon. But Myrkul was starting to lock in, beaming Will, frightening him in place. The Mind Flayer took this window to dominate Nightsong, turning her against us. Nightsong sprinted over to Karlach and Will, radiating them with the power of the moon as she brutally smited Karlach twice. But Karlach held steady and was able to cleave down the Mind Flayer, maiming Aelin in the process. With Aelin back on our side, Karlach flew right up to Myrkul to swing on him head on. Shadowheart flew in to back up Karlach, radiating and blinding Myrkul. Recovered from my stun, I went back into a rage only to critically miss my first jabber throw, but I was able to land my second as Will's Cambion continued to target the Necromite pods. Frightened Will proceeded to call down lightning to shock Myrkul right before he beamed Shadowheart and smited Karlach. Maimed Aelin made a high impact play by frightening a Necromite in the corner of the room. The Necromites Necromites began building up numbers, but Shadowheart was able to radiate Myrkul, further decreasing his hit chances with her radiating orbs. Karlach went for the gamble and took a swing at Myrkul, losing her life savings as a result. But Shadowheart continued popping off, critting Myrkul with her mighty mace before making an 8-int play by trying to heal Bone Shield Karlach. I stayed up on my platform, throwing in jabbers paired with Will's lightning to deal consistent damage to Myrkul, while Will's Cambion continued to thin the ranks of the Necromites. Myrkul turned his sights to Shadowheart, frightening her, but whiffing his smite, causing him to get hit with a smite from Shadowheart's hat, further decreasing his hit chance. While Myrkul stared down Shadowheart, she commanded her spirit weapon to smash him, dazing Myrkul for Aelin to run up and hit him twice for a staggering 6 damage. Necromites began launching their counterattack, interrupting Will's concentration as Shadowheart continued to radiate and blind Myrkul. With Myrkul focused on Shadowheart, Will began plotting an extraction mission to get Karlach back in the fight. The only problem was that Karlach's shirt prevented her from being moved by force, so with her last bit of strength, Karlach took off her shirt, which allowed Will to fly in and open a dimension door to bring Karlach up to me as he chugged the health potion. With Karlach now safely out of bone chill range, I threw more jabbers into Myrkul, getting frightened in the process, but dealing more consistent damage before chugging a health potion myself. Wounded and frightened, Shadowheart decided to Sanctuary and cast False Life to buy herself more time. But as Myrkul launched his counterattack, staring down Will and smiting Shadowheart's spirit weapon, Shadowheart made another 8-int play by using her Sentinel attack on Myrkul, breaking her Sanctuary and leaving her vulnerable. Aelin tried to come to her aid, swinging on Myrkul, whiffing, but then landing a massive 8 damage crit. Things began looking bleak as the Necromites continued building up, damaging us further. But Shadowheart wasn't giving up, summoning more Spirit Guardians to radiate Myrkul as she chugged a potion of necrotic resistance on top of her Night Singer's favor just to send a message. Frightened Will played medic, throwing down a potion on himself and Karlach before chugging another for himself as I threw more jabbers into Myrkul before doubling down with a speed potion to let me critically miss another jabber throw. Clothless Karlach took her turn to chug down some more health, giving her just enough to tank a beam from Myrkul. Shadowheart and Aelin kept swinging on Myrkul, but the Necromites were beginning to move in and play medic themselves, healing Myrkul back up and breaking Shadowheart's Spirit Guardian concentration. I threw in another jabber before turning the tides by healing back up to nearly full health with the help of my necklace that Astarion had stole from Lady Esther back in the mountains. Will's Cambion burned down another Necromite before flying towards another group to back up Shadowheart. Now having more room to breathe, Karlach chugged a health potion and put her shirt back on while Shadowheart flew out of bone chill range, allowing her to also chug a health potion. With everyone back in good shape, Madman Will flew in towards Myrkul to start aura farming by blasting Myrkul point blank. Sensing our overconfidence, Myrkul broke out the big guns, one-tapping Aelin before beaming Will, frightening him in place. With one turn left of my speed potion, I turned my attention towards thinning the Necromites out before they could heal Myrkul further. Our hot-blooded companion Karlach was itching to get back into the fray and flew in to swing on Myrkul, tanking a beam and getting frightened in place as Shadowheart summoned more Spirit Guardians to radiate and blind Myrkul. Will continued aura farming, blasting Myrkul for 11 damage before he could stare down Shadowheart and swing on Karlach, downing her again with a crit, causing her to take her shirt back off. Will stayed on the gas, blasting Myrkul before being frightened again and whiffing a flourish. Myrkul then whiffed a swing on Will, but more Necromites were hatching and moving in. With only 38 health left, Will's Cambion went to burn down Myrkul, getting burnt himself for his efforts. Will was next to try, missing both Eldritch Blasts, but giving me time to go back into a rage and throw in a jabber, killing death itself with a crit. As Myrkul fell, Ketheric popped self-res and started crashing out before he burst into green flames. With that, the bone chill was lifted, so Aelin popped self-res herself and started crashing out on Ketheric. We helped Karlach back to her feet, and as we approached to loot Ketheric's magic rock, our dream visitor spawned in to explain that the magic rocks held by the Chosen were used to control the big brain. We asked why Ketheric got a cool transformation and how to get our own, and our dream visitor went on to explain that Ketheric was more than just a dog. He was the Chosen of Myrkul, the god of necromancy, and the final form we saw was his avatar state. Further, she explained that the other two Chosen were comprised of Gortash, Chosen of Bane, the god of tyranny, and Orin, who is likely a worshipper of Baal, the god of murder. All of this meant that the Absolute was just a front for the three gods of death, and our real enemies are the Chosen of the Dead Three. We asked about the magic rocks, and our dream visitor explained that the big brain was rocking a magic crown that was controlled using the magic rocks. With that, our dream visitor said we must aim our sights towards wrangling the rocks from the other two Chosen before the big brain could issue the order to turn everyone infected with tadpoles into mind flayers. We leapt through a convenient portal that brought us right back to Ketheric's former throne in Moonrise Towers, which was now occupied by our new companion Minthara. But first, Warlock Will had some explaining to do about his pact. Will shared that back when he was 17, the cult of the dragon goddess Tiamat came to summon the Dragon Queen to destroy Baldur's Gate. Right in the nick of time, Mizora appeared and offered him the power to save the city, so Will sold his soul to save his city. For Will's heroic sacrifices, his dad disowned him after being gaslit by Mizora, but Will kept his head held high as he told us that the Absolute's cult must have taken his dad to Worm's Rock Fortress back in Baldur's Gate, giving us our next lead. After recruiting the Cougar, we talked to Minthara. Minthara explained she had some history with the other chosen, Orin. Orin was the one that indoctrinated her into the cult of the Absolute. In vengeance, Minthara took up an oath to find her and murder her, solidifying her as the perfect companion to bring on our journey to eliminate the remaining 2 chosen, joining us in place of Shadowheart for the journey into the city. On our way out, we gained some insight on the history between Ketheric and Aelin as Ketheric's favorite daughter Isabel came walking in.
Oh my god, lesbians.
After Isabel and Aelin finished saying hello to one another, they asked to stay in our camp.
I hardly know you.
We must take succor in one another's body.
The lesbians, move out of here! I got lesbians coming through!
So we all returned to camp, and I rallied Astarion and Gale to give Will and Karlach a rest, and to give Shadowheart a chance to get some answers from Aelin. Nightsong continued to crab swirl Shadowheart further, causing her to realize that her parents were still alive, and that the Sharans had abducted her in the middle of a Selûnite rite. Heeding Nightsong's words, Shadowheart decided to swap religions, devoting herself back to Selûne, setting her sights on saving her parents from the lair of her abductors, and Nightsong even gave Shadowheart a new spear to help with her mission. While Shadowheart processed everything, we asked Gale for his thoughts, since we made it past Moonrise Towers without him having to blow himself up, but he was fixated on the crown atop the brain. Gale explained we needed to research the brain and the crown more by going to Sorcerer's Sundries in Baldur's Gate, and we agreed that if we made it to the city, we would head there. Just as we were about to reach the road to Baldur's Gate, another frog squad tried to stop us. But Astarion had been on a training arc back in camp, and powered with Halsin's blood, Astarion nearly farmed the frogs for all their legs before they could even move. After a reduce from Gale, a kick from me to reposition the leader, and a glyph from Gale, Astarion finished farming the frogs, opening our path towards Baldur's Gate. So after failing to find the cure for our tadpoles at Moonrise Towers, we set off from the now cured lands towards the city of Baldur's Gate to take down the remaining 2 chosen and end the Absolute.